it was Lewis again that talked about, evil is corrupted goodness.
Yeah.
And so to use something that, was created for good, I mean, we were not trained at all to protect the virtue or integrity of any girl that, I mean, and even to say that, it sounds so foreign
and it was
to the pervasiveness of another system.
It happened in like 50 years.
With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful ends for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more.
Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. Michael Thompson hanging out with SJ Jennings.
Yeah,
man. In between episodes, since we're shooting 2 today and this is airing a week later, I thought I need to look a little different. And Andy said with the hat.
Also, we couldn't see your face.
They don't see my face as well with the dark, which I know the rules and I violated them, but no shame.
No shame.
No shame. But
no.
Yeah. So my younger self.
Yeah. Backwards hat guy.
Backwards hat guy. It's always when you see a guy with his hat turned backwards, he's going back.
He is.
He's going back.
He's stretching back there.
You know who pulls off a good backward hat is Josh.
Yeah.
Well, he's also 30-something as opposed to me.
He's the back there now.
As opposed to me.
He's the back there age.
That's right.
For me too.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
And
what do you got on me? 5.5 years? I think 5.5 years.
Yeah, I'm 60 now, but
yeah.
So we are on this adventure and exploration with the subject of shame, and before we kind of come up and out of the valley of it, we're going to explore some more about the significance of it. Mm-hmm. And I feel good, SJ, about the reality that we've spent. I mean, from where we started to where we're going to end, adding almost really 2 episodes because the discoveries have been more and more significant, more important. And I just want to hit a couple things before we take our quick break of some things that we've said. And maybe you can react to these 2 things quickly, and then we can go to break. But,
okay.
Learning to be a good boy or a good girl, as opposed to being a loved boy or a loved girl, that's the trajectory difference, I think, between shame and versus having someone there to help you in a situation of which shame can get its hold and get a hold of you and the way that you see and feel and think and what you believe. So a good boy rather than a love boy. And what I mean by that, love is conditional in that moment. And when love is conditional, a heart learns to perform. And it's about what I do is who I am and how to maintain relational connectivity or relational health. I have to do something. And you're going to judge it whether it's enough or not, good or bad.
And reward me or punish me based on that performance.
Right, all of that. So I found this on the internet, Google, AI, cycles of shame. And I thought this is a great summary. And I'll give this to Andy. He can put it up here. But a mistake is made, and a person makes a mistake or engages in some kind of inappropriate or maybe even destructive behavior. We'll call that mistake. Here's the cycle. And then shame, the person feels guilt about that mistake. And now, the seeds of shame are there. Guilt is a beginning. It doesn't always mean that shame has to be produced, but guilt is the beginning. You did something wrong, or that wasn't right. Then there's the dwelling here in the cycles, where when you get a chance to think about it and your thoughts on your own, what do we say at the beginning of every conference? What's the question we ask everybody?
Yeah, what are the chances you've interpreted your life accurately? 0.
I mean, kaboom.
Yeah.
Right? So
everybody always goes,
So here's mistake, here's guilt,
mm-hmm.
and now the dwelling on it and the analyzing of it and the odds of coming to an accurate interpretation
mm-hmm.
is where, no, this had nothing to do with you, honey. This was that guy. So even help in interpreting that by a more mature and kind voice
mm-hmm.
would be so helpful. But then we see after the dwelling comes the shame, and then comes the behavior as a result of shame,
yeah.
right? So instead of you feeling what I think you're feeling about me in the mistake that I made, how can I make you laugh? Or how can I make you proud? Or how can I make you just not mad?
Mm-hmm.
And so we learn these behaviors, right, which
mm-hmm.
sound pretty innocent until they become, part of this construct that...
They're the stick we hit ourselves with.
Yeah. Or the behavior that one step before the stick is, what can I do to remedy this?
Sure.
How can I save this moment?
This feels awful.
I mean,
how can I make that not happen again?
I was thinking about this in between our episodes, shame and codependency.
Oh.
And their relationship,
mm-hmm.
right? Shame and guilt, shame and fear, shame and hiding.
Sure.
So then that behavior, the self-destructive behavior comes. Then, so now we're kind of completing the cycle. Then the last part of this is from there on, after rehearsal, after you rehearsed this a few times in your life story, the beliefs, the agreements, the vows, and the beliefs that set in, now it's perpetuating. And maybe self-perpetuating.
Self-perpetuating.
Right? We call them triggers, moments that feel familiar, that hit a nerve. And so, I think these are, if this is the cycle of shame, and it started when I was 4 or 5 or 8 or 9, what's it look like? Do you grow out of it? Is it somehow extinguished when you reach some grand age?
I don't think no.
It's not our experience.
You're not just going to grow out of it. It's going to grow into you even deeper,
right.
if you'll let it do that. And I don't mean that in a way like you shouldn't let that happen. We don't know what we don't know until we know.
Yeah.
And then when we know, we have a choice to make.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
if you don't see this cycle,
mm-hmm.
and you're naive or oblivious to it, these are the internal systems that now are running you.
Mm-hmm.
And where did they come from? And what is the juice, right? That is firing them up,
mm-hmm.
as a car guy with the RPMs,
mm-hmm.
the higher gears.
Mm-hmm.
And now it is without brakes in many cases.
And the trouble of discovering this cycle and not going back into your story and using this as a tool to see, like, wait a minute, where does this come from? God, like we have talked about tons on this podcast, going back with God to a moment, a wounding moment, discovering the agreements and vows based on that, and seeing your false self for what it is, false, right?
Yeah.
If you just see this cycle as, well, I really, I make a mistake, I'm ashamed about it, I'm going to engage in self-medication, then I'm ashamed about the self-medication.
Right.
And that's what you're talking about, self-perpetuating.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, just wanting to, when I was drinking a lot and doing all that, when I was self-medicating, I knew it wasn't helpful, A. I knew it wasn't right. I knew I was being judged by others and harmful to my family. And I didn't care. because I couldn't stop the cycle.
Yeah.
You know, and I say I don't care. What I mean by that is, well, there's nothing I can do to make this stop, so I may as well do it until it stops.
Yeah. It was more, and that as a great, sad commentary on, it was more powerful than my will.
Even in the times that I took a break, right, and got sober for a certain amount of time, it was based upon the shame I felt about not being sober.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
And so it wasn't lasting.
Right.
It was inevitably it was going to come back because I wasn't getting to the root cause. You know, my motivations to try to stay sober and my desire to be well were not based on an understanding of what being well really meant.
Yeah.
So, having said all that,
let's
take a break.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back on the Exploring More podcast.
Heart of a Warrior is definitely a place where I feel like men can come as they are, right? So inviting a man to come as they are and to find out that there's more for them, right? That God has more in store for them, and more in store in the sense of things that maybe they haven't yet known or uncovered, I think is why I would invite another man to Heart of a Warrior, to welcome them into a brotherhood where they can feel like they're not alone in a world where we often feel like we're the only ones going through something. So just that simple invite has the opportunity to change the course of another man's story drastically. So that's why I would invite a man to Heart of a Warrior.
Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast, where, I was back to me.
Couldn't take it
I try to
anymore.
keep my
It's all
face
good, man.
in the light, Andy. But so SJ, this episode, we're really kind of diving into the significance, the power, the weightiness of sexual encounters that are shame producing. And I would say in a because of gender and because we're sexual beings and because it's just part of the way God designed us, be fruitful and multiply. You know, he says the all of that reality. I think this is an area where shame really has its day. Was talking to Cole, one of our teammates. He's got 2 boys. I remember boyhood. I mean, I remember getting dried off, my brother and I, and literally, we had these towels that had a little cap in the corner. I mean, so it was a towel that fit on your head.
Yeah, like a little hoodie almost.
Because the corner had a hoodie, and it wrapped around you.
Yeah.
But I remember running out of the bathroom because the goal was to get that off of your head and just run around naked.
Yeah.
Just run around naked.
Yep.
I mean, what boys and girls don't get to do that?
Oh, man.
Right? And Cole and I were laughing about that.
Steven used to run outside.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So,
little guy.
Then you learn, that that's not cute when you're 8.
Right.
Or 18 or what, So there's something about that innocence and naivety that's even celebrated, like, go, look at him go, look at him go, and then, things, what would my potty humor, hot dogs and sausages and, things that just could, at least in boys' worlds, were very, very, a part of our silliness.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's like, hey, don't do that at school when they have hot dogs, okay? Right? So like, well, what's that mean? Mm-hmm. So I think about, this thing that is, going to the garden and they were naked and unashamed, says the creation narrative. And then the fall, and I was naked and so I hid. I was naked and ashamed, and so I hid. And even that, idea of being ashamed. I think back to in this particular subject of sexual encounters and sexual wounding moments that are of that nature, and how absolutely crippling they can be. I think in most of our stories and the stories that we get the privilege to be involved in, this narrative comes up more than less in the life and journey of men and women, of what happened to them there. And it wasn't play, it wasn't innocent, it wasn't naive. It was somehow, some way, brutally disrupted is probably a really
assaulting.
Yeah. A very altering moment where you don't know what's happening, but it's not good. Mm-hmm. It's not right.
Yeah.
And living with that's in that category, SJ, and shame anyway, at least in the shame conversation, of something's actually being done to you. And shame makes it just about certain that you're not going to talk to anybody.
Even if that person that assaulted you doesn't say, this is our secret, or don't tell anybody, our tendency is still to hide it. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. We're not going to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think back to Stringer's book. This is the lion's share of his research and his book about unwanted. And I think it's even to say it like this, that somehow, some way, in that molesting, abusing, accosting, in that moment, the wildness that our bodies, they react. It can even feel somehow, quote, pleasurable, or somehow feel good, when it's not good.
Right.
And that just makes the matter all the more, absolutely all the more.
Brings more shame to it.
Yeah, devastating.
Yeah.
And so, Stringer, he writes about sexual shame. It's attempting to reenact the formative stories of trauma, abuse, and shame that convinced us we were unwanted to begin with. In other words, we are not addicted primarily to sex or even disordered intimacy. Instead, we are bonded to feelings of shame and judgment. So, bonded to feelings of shame and judgment. So this thing that either happened to us, and maybe even as you got older, maybe you acted out because somehow, some way, somebody or something showed you even how to do that. I mean, we know that there are correlations statistically between sex abusive acts and being sexually abused. And what you were talking about earlier about wildly this thing's in motion of, I can't not do this, right? I can't stop, this unwanted behavior.
Yep.
And as Jay Stringer says, I mean, I think as you move towards the back third or quarter of his book, he brings hope. He starts with there's hope, but he spends so many pages you got to see it. You have to see this. And so, I think there was, something in my story where, and it was the first one, for me was an altercation, an incident where, my boyhood friends, I think I'm 8, maybe 9. One of their older brothers had the magazines. Mm-hmm. We were playing hide and seek. I wasn't looking for it that day. I wasn't planning on any of that. It was just one of those days where a hide and seek game.
Have you ever met a guy who said I was looking for it?
No. Playing, Army in the woods, looking for a ball that rolled under your dad's bed, going to put on your dad's shoes in his closet, clumpy shoes, dress up. I've heard many, many, many stories. Even so that's the, we'll call it the accidental kind of discoveries to your question. The other ones, I've heard stories of fathers, uncles, grandfathers, saying, "Hey, here."
Yeah.
Or they're
looking.
Know
about sex? Go read this.
They're looking at it, and junior or grandson comes along and says, "Here, when I'm," and he's like, "Whoa."
Circuits blown.
And so, and don't tell, right? And don't tell.
Don't tell
mom. Grandmother. Don't tell mom. But oh my gosh, I've heard many, many versions of that story where the disruptive nature of pornographic, or it can be something that you see, films today, man, it can happen in a scene change.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And the ratings were there for a reason, and what was rated R and worse when we were growing up, dude, that's on TV now. Mm-hmm. That's just on TV. Mm-hmm. And then these things, with boys, and I'm talking particularly about boys right now.
Yeah.
And yet statistically, numbers have increased dramatically for pornography and exposure to girls at young ages, and what they can see on social media and what's available. And it's I had this conversation not too long ago. I've written about it in Heart of a Warrior and King Me. To be naive about this with your children is not a good idea. And yet to be forced to talk about it when they're 8 and 9, that's not fun.
Right.
But because they have a device, and even all the security systems, it can all be on your kids. You can have done all that right. All you have to do
is sit down on the bus next to a kid that doesn't have those
100%. 100%.
And it's happening, seems to happen about the same age as it was for us, 7, 8 years
9.
old.
Yeah. Well,
it's still right around there, even though there's the easier access to it.
Seems
like.
I have a theory that I think it targets more that 8, 9, and 10-year-old age over the last 40 years, even though it's accessible to youngers. But I think that there's something about shame and what it can do at 8, 9, and 10. Not that a 6-year-old, 5-year-old couldn't be exposed to it and it have some kind of, it's still abusive and an aggressive invasion, even when they're boys. But I don't know what makes, other than the enemy just knows that it'll be secret, and that boys of that age, 8, 9, 10, are less likely to say, "Hey, Jimmy showed me something," mm-hmm. or "Dad," So there has to be a lot of relational capital there between dad and son, or mom and daughter, to be able to put light on it and say, and I think, what was it? Where were we that the definition of light being put on something? Who was that? Was that our East or West guys? One of the guys talked about shame and it being allowed to live in the dark in secret. Did Did you already talk about that?
I did actually. I thought I put it into my notes, but I don't have it here. But I almost want to go find it. But it had to do with, shame. Shame requires secrecy and silence, and there's a real truth to the idea that it's almost like you're making a vow with yourself to never talk about it or to never share it with anybody.
You talked about that in the last episode of when somebody says, I've never told this to anyone.
Right.
Yeah, but I think there was something prior to that we didn't dwell on much, which I think is appropriate for this idea of darkness, secrecy.
Yeah.
Even alone,
I do have one here. The fire of shame is fed by silence, judgment, and secrecy.
Oh,
Left to burn, it will damage all aspects of our lives.
That's it. That's the one I was thinking about.
Maybe so.
Very, very, very powerful idea. So, just to focus more on boys a little bit, because I think that's kind of our privilege and honor. Maybe responsibility to speak about it.
There's this big question here for us. Why is pornography, unwanted sexual behavior so pervasive? Is that where you were going?
Yeah, that's a great place to go.
That's great.
Yeah.
Again, the circuits get blown when we're younger.
Yeah.
We don't understand what we're looking at, and it's that tension of, I'm really captivated and fascinated by that, but it feels somehow wrong. Something's not right in my mind when I see that at 10 years old. Yeah,
I remember, bro, so say the question one more time so I can, pervasive, was that?
Why is pornography or unwanted sexual behavior so pervasive?
Yeah, so back to the imagery and the pornography. Fifth grade, everybody knew which National Geographic was in the library.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sears and Penny's catalogs with pages of bras. And, I think back to, so this is the 60s and 70s, right? And then you have the celebrities who they look a certain way, and that's all promoted. So boys are indoctrinated, are pervasive is a good word. It is in advertisement. It is in just so many spaces in even in the PG form, right? It's a seductive, it's an image of the model, and back to what do you think what effect do you think that's going to have on boys? And then when you add that to the pervasive amount of things being produced with that in mind. I mean, they're
trying to sell stuff.
They're not,
and they don't really care how they sell it.
They're not like, oh, really? Didn't know we were.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that a bikini model holding a chainsaw would attract
sell
a
more
guy's
chainsaws.
attention. Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Right. So I think that's a part of, it was Lewis again that talked about evil is corrupted goodness.
Yeah.
And so to use something that, was created for good, I mean, we were not trained at all to protect the virtue or integrity of any girl that, I mean, even to say that, it sounds so foreign
and it was
to the pervasiveness of another system.
It happened in like 50 years. The 60s, 70s, 50 years before that, you're talking about 1900s, 1910s, 1920s. Women were not allowed to bathe, and I mean go for a swim without being covered. And I'm not saying that's the answer.
Right. No, exactly.
But what I am saying is there's somewhere along the line there where the a woman's natural femininity and her natural beauty, and her desire to be seen, her desire to be loved, her desire to be wanted and appreciated and seen as beautiful was corrupted.
Yeah. Turned into something
for a nefarious purpose.
Well, and that, you said it earlier, I mean, it became part of the consumer scripts, the consumer, the plays that advertisers were going to run. And, when you keep trying to add to the shock value, to the exposure.
Oh, it has to
escalate. To the escalation of it. Yeah. Where's it going to go? So, I think that's a in a 5-minute answer, the pervasiveness, boys still, and fathers of boys, there's still this responsibility there. And yet, if the father's disqualified in this area of sexual exploration, and yes, maybe what's happened to them, but at some point at 8, 9, and 10, all of a sudden the keys are in your hands. Mm-hmm. It's not what was shown to you or done to you, but now circuits are blown. I like that you said that. And now we start looking for, we start trying to arrange for, we start knowing where this or that is. And so if it's not a National Geographic in the library anymore, but it's on Billy or Johnny's phone, even though yours, you either don't have one or yours is, some security systems are put on there. Yeah. And we don't need to talk about any remedies or solutions right now. I'm just saying that this aids significantly to the sexual assaults and the sexual misappropriations of boys and girls in young ages.
Yeah. With the pervasiveness of, in particular, pornography, I'm not going to quote any statistics because I don't have them in front of me. But what has been happening as these things have become the center of our lives.
Yeah, the normal, sure.
What's happened, I find it interesting. That's what's happened is there's been a proliferation of the inability to have a meaningful relationship.
Yeah.
Particularly in men and young men.
Yeah.
Because they have the easy access to this thing that brings them the serotonin, melatonin, all the chemical pleasure chemicals without any of the work of having a relationship with a woman.
Right.
And I say that from
and vice versa.
To some extent,
I think it's
from
true.
Experience.
Yeah.
But also I think this thing, this pornography and unwanted sexual behavior is so pervasive because we're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to, like I opened with, I'm trying to medicate. I'm trying to self-remedy. I'm trying to self-rescue with this behavior, and it's not working because it's, ruining relationships. It's estranging wives. It's, handicapping us as we try to enter into relationship. But you know what it is doing? It's giving me some kind of comfort.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's comfort like I'm comfortable on a door floating in the ocean after the ship is sunk versus actually in the ocean.
Yeah.
If you want to call that comfort.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think the pervasiveness of it is multi-layered. A, it's accessibility like you're talking about. B, we are trying to find comfort somewhere, and it's a remedy that actually gives us more wounding than it does remedy.
Back to the reinforcing cycles.
And then C, what's the alternative? Because shame keeps us quiet about what he talks about in what Jay Stringer talks about, the origins of this behavior are what's really important. I'm going to read this quote now. A desire to stop pursuing unwanted sexual behavior. I've never met a guy engaged in using porn that didn't want to stop, but can't seem to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? A desire to stop pursuing unwanted sexual behavior will only be as effective as your ability to identify and dismantle the underlying infrastructure that creates your need for it.
Yeah, man. We got to put that on we'll make sure Andy gets a few of these things that need to be on the screen. Read it one more time. I mean,
a desire to stop pursuing unwanted sexual behavior will be only as effective as your ability to identify and dismantle the underlying infrastructure that creates your need for it.
Yeah. As opposed, now, what I love about Jay's book, and because there's other context to that very statement,
Sure.
as opposed to accountability culture, as opposed to...
Oh, yeah, that is not...
as opposed to addressing the behaviors and the symptoms rather than the causes.
Right.
I mean, I think that's why I love his book and his work is, no, this is upstream to the place of, very, very purity culture within the church context. We understand why they wanted to address it that way, but turning this thing into an evil, right, or not till you're married. I mean, it was just very, very, very difficult for teenage girls, particularly, and boys, how do you shut that theology and belief system down and are now free to enjoy and experience, something that God made for marriage. Mm-hmm. So I get mm-hmm. the means and maybe even the methods, but the results have not been good, especially according to Jay's research.
Right.
And around purity culture.
Right.
So
and accountability.
And across and
having more sheriffs doesn't make people stop breaking the law.
Yeah.
I mean,
makes it harder to do it. But
easier to get caught.
But if you can't, yes. And then shame just, comes having a different kind of day when you get caught. I think two things, and I think that's a tremendous quote. One is Bonhoeffer. I remember it was 25 years ago when I came across this famous Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote about the men who are in the red light district are men looking for God.
Right.
So, and yet, because we were in religious systems that had such a punitive
and parochial
propaganda of God,
mm-hmm.
it made it very, 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 not just challenging, almost impossible to want to be close to God in the midst of your shame, mm-hmm. especially sexual shame.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that whole system doesn't bring you closer to God, which is wild because he's not absent while you're doing that.
Yeah.
So I think the scriptures are pretty helpful in the New Testament. Jesus just keeps moving towards people who are riddled by shame, who the old covenant told them to get away. Mm-hmm. To be something is wrong with you, unclean.
Yeah, man.
So I just I want to say that to stringers, until you look at this system, and maybe even this is a great time to make an announcement, a commercial for a good counselor, mm-hmm. which I say that and I almost twinge a bit,
right?
Because there are counselors who could actually reinforce the very shame that you're trying to get free from.
Yeah, let me just say this: if you're trying out a counselor and they make you feel shame, get up and walk out.
Yeah, maybe that's the best. That's
Not
the best
bring
advice.
you to the point where you were feeling, but if they shame you in some way, you got to leave.
And usually, what we would say, I think, is the current behavior that gets you into a counselor. Yeah, you want to know why you're here, what's hurting, but it should happen pretty quick. Well, tell me your story.
Right.
what happened to you?
Give some background.
I believe that should be the weightier part of those first, counseling encounters.
Mm-hmm.
And I even have had a couple guys. It's definitely not the first question they ask,
Mm-hmm.
but down the road, what is there anything you're not telling me? Is there anything that is anything that you feel like is just
you haven't shared yet,
gnawing
now's
at
the
you?
time.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and so.
Mm-hmm.
To put people at that crossroads a few times of uncomfortability and vulnerability, and then to hijack them with more shame, because shame's going to be speaking right then and right there.
Oh my gosh.
You can't tell
Don't you
anybody.
dare.
Don't say it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is that's encouragement for the start of relief. I do think the weekends that we offer break the ice in that space. Get at least uncover some of the neglected storyline of your past, and could even help you prepare for a counselor. The other thing, SJ, that I think is really powerful in this, and how and why shame moves so deeply and significantly in the sexual experiences and sexual encounters. Man, it has to do with peer pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Fifth and sixth graders are trying to, you're just starting to kind of notice them.
You're mostly about spitballs.
It's still,
and other,
it's still
kind of stuff.
yeah.
Though.
It could be about teasing them or making fun, but that gives way to, somewhere in that sixth and seventh grade, the pressure starts to come along with boys, particularly
middle school dances.
Yeah.
Oof.
And I think the scene is set for the boys that are trying to get and the girls that are hopeful that they'll be wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's just a gross simplicity to it all.
Yeah.
But wait, are we talking about 27-year-olds now? 35-year-olds? No, we're talking about 12 and 13-year-olds, right? When somebody is not, so now you've got some of the training, pornography, some of the imagery and things that are exposed, and just steal naivety, steal youth, and blow these circuits, and then you have the reinforcements of a system within culture that is so powerfully bent towards getting.
Yeah.
And I was talking with Ashley about this too.
You know what they call it now? Body count.
Oh yeah, that's yucky for sure.
It's really like.
But one of the systems that Ashley was telling me, I talked about my daughter last episode, was the beauty industry.
Oh.
Which I write about and researched quite a bit in the chapter on the Queen in King Me, and all of that industry and all of that advertisement and all of those products, billions of dollars, more than the NFL, I think it was Major League Baseball, NFL, and one other sport gross earnings, is less than the global beauty industry.
Yeah.
But like you
said, it's everywhere.
It makes sense, right? It makes sense that, to look younger, to feel better. I mean, these are the advertising words, right? How do you compete with that and the stars that they bring on to model it and to advertise it?
Photoshop images.
The whole point that she was making to me was, Dad, it is to make you discontent with how you look and make you feel like you're not enough.
And I just had a conversation with a woman. We were at one of our marriage events, and she had the coolest hats. She was wearing hats all weekend, and hats are good. I like hats, and if you're a hat guy, you're a hat guy. If you're a hat gal, you're a hat gal. She had hats on the whole weekend. Well, come to find out, it was because her hair was turning gray. And what you could see of her hair was blonde, but the rest of it was turning gray, like at the top of her head. Right. And I looked at her and I said, that is a crown of glory on your head. Don't hide that under a hat.
Yeah.
And then Sherry chimed in because she's all about that, like you have earned and deserve to show off every one of those gray hairs. Yeah. But we're told, no, you can't let people know that. And the assault on women and their hearts, bro, it's almost like we ought to have the ladies come in and talk about shame, because every time I walk through the grocery store aisle and those magazines are there, there was something up that popped up on the screen. Sherry and it was something on the news, and something popped up on the screen, and, there's just way too much skin showing. And I just looked out the window because I know she's watching me.
Right, of course. And,
and I don't say that from I'm nervous and going to get caught or any of that. I don't live under that shame anymore, but I want to honor her by not looking at that. And it's just everywhere.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. And so there is an act of your will to move in another way or move in another direction. And yet, back to that question before we wrap it up, the experience that so many boys and girls have had in their tweens is a training for shaming.
Oh, yeah.
We talk about training for reigning. Mm-hmm. The enemy's camp is a training for shaming.
No doubt.
Because what it eventually is really after is that identity piece that you talked about, something's wrong with me. And then secondly, it is this breeding ground for conditional love. And I can't think of any better soil for shame to grow in and kind of take over the garden of a heart than those two things. And so here's the end of this. Here's the end of this episode. Back to Bagger Vance. No, it's just a moment ago.
Just a moment ago.
So I think of how do we, in setting up the next episode is, how do we go to God with all this? How do we get relief? How do we get freedom? How do we get healing? How do we get the kind of care,
relief?
Yeah, kind of care that somehow in that care disassembles and even maybe in the greatest of ways nullifies that voice and presence of shame that's associated with some time in our lives and our journey, so that we don't have to go forward carrying that stuff that, maybe it feels dormant most of the time. Yeah,
there's a difference between remission,
right, and dormancy.
Healing.
Yeah, dormancy and remission's on the way, but I think of dormancy, no, it's just lying there, waiting, and then but remission that leads to healing. Yeah, that's a good idea. So, if I was afraid and so I hid, what is this promise or offer of perfect love in 1 John casts out fear? I was afraid and so I hid, and to be loved through what happened, either to you or what you did. Yeah, how do you move towards God, who is waiting?
Yeah,
is waiting to free us from the weight and the consequences and the punishment. Back to what Papa said, it's my joy to treat it. So
bring the treatment.
Yeah, bring the treatment.
Yeah.
So
into that.
We'd love for you to rate and review, and
this drops too on March 12th, so it's not too late if you want to come to the Encounter weekend. Register if there's still spots. There probably aren't, but we can maybe We know a guy, like
Yeah.
we said last time.
Yeah,
So shoot
that's
us a
right.
message.
So looking forward to next time on the
Yeah.
Exploring More podcast, where we can turn a corner and how does healing from shame and freedom from shame, how does that go? How's that look? Is there a plan for that? I believe so. We'll see you next time on the Exploring More podcast.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.